Now is Cupid a child of conscience, he makes restitution. Shakespeare. Mr. Duncan Macwheeble, no longer commissary or bailey, though still enjoying the empty name of the latter dignity, had escaped proscription by an early secession from the insurgent party and by his insignificance. Edward found him in his office, immersed among papers and accounts. Before him was a large bicker of oatmeal porridge, and at the side thereof a horn spoon and a bottle of twopenny. Eagerly running his eye over a voluminous law paper, he from time to time shoveled an immense spoonful of these nutritive viands into his capacious mouth. A pot-bellied Dutch bottle of brandy which stood by intimated either that this honest limb of the law had taken his morning already, or that he meant to season his porridge with such digestive, or perhaps both circumstances might reasonably be inferred. His nightcap and morning gown had whilome been of tartan, but, equally cautious and frugal, the honest Bailey had got them dyed black, lest their original illumined color might remind his visitors of his unlucky excursion to Derby. To sum up the picture, his face was daubed with snuff up to the eyes, and his fingers with ink up to the knuckles. He looked dubiously at Waverley as he approached the little green rail which fenced his desk and stool from the approach of the vulgar. Nothing could give the Bailey more annoyance than the idea of his acquaintance being claimed by any of the unfortunate gentlemen who were now so much more likely to need assistance than to afford profit. But this was the rich young Englishman, who knew what might be his situation. He was the Baron's friend too. What was to be done? Illustration. While these reflections gave an air of absurd perplexity to the poor man's visage, Waverley, reflecting on the communication he was about to make to him, of a nature so ridiculously contrasted with the appearance of the individual, could not help bursting out a-laughing, as he checked the propensity to exclaim with Syphax. Cato's a proper person to entrust a love-tale with. As Mr. Macwheeble had no idea of any person laughing heartily who was either encircled by peril or oppressed by poverty, the hilarity of Edward's countenance greatly relieved the embarrassment of his own, and, giving him a tolerably hearty welcome to little Veolan, he asked what he would choose for breakfast. His visitor had, in the first place, something for his private ear, and begged leave to bolt the door. Duncan by no means liked this precaution, which savoured of danger to be apprehended, but he could not now draw back. Convinced he might trust this man, as he could make it his interest to be faithful, Edward communicated his present situation and future schemes to Macwheeble. The wily agent listened with apprehension when he found Waverley was still in a state of proscription, was somewhat comforted by learning that he had a passport, rubbed his hands with glee when he mentioned the amount of his present fortune, opened huge eyes when he heard the brilliancy of his future expectations, but when he expressed his intention to share them with Miss Rose Bradwardine, ecstasy had almost deprived the honest man of his senses. The Bailey started from his three-footed stool like the Pythoness from her tripod, flung his best wig out of the window, because the block on which it was placed stood in the way of his career, chucked his cap to the ceiling, caught it as it fell, whistled Tullocorum, danced a Highland fling with inimitable grace and agility, and then threw himself exhausted into a chair, exclaiming, "Lady Waverley! 10,000 a year the least penny. Lord preserve my poor understanding." Illustration. "Amen with all my heart," said Waverley, "but now, Mr. Macwheeble, let us proceed to business." This word had somewhat a sedative effect, but the Bailey's head, as he expressed himself, was still in the bees. He mended his pen, however, marked half a dozen sheets of paper with an ample marginal fold, whipped down Dallas of St. Martin styles from a shelf, where that venerable work-roost with Stairs' Institutions, Dalton's Doubts, Balfour's Practiques, and a parcel of old account books, opened the volume at the article Contract of Marriage, and prepared to make what he called a SMA minute to prevent parties frae resiling. With some difficulty Waverley made him comprehend that he was going a little too fast. He explained to him that he should want his assistance, in the first place, to make his residence safe for the time, by writing to the officer at Tully Veolan that Mr. Stanley, an English gentleman nearly related to Colonel Talbot, was upon a visit of business at Mr. Macwheeble's, and, knowing the state of the country, had sent his passport for Captain Foster's inspection. This produced a polite answer from the officer, with an invitation to Mr. Stanley to dine with him, which was declined, as may easily be supposed, under pretense of business. Waverley's next request was, that Mr. Macwheeble would dispatch a man and horse to the post town at which Colonel Talbot was to address him, with directions to wait there until the post should bring a letter for Mr. Stanley, and then to forward it to Little Veolan with all speed. In a moment the baillie was in search of his apprentice, or servitor, as he was called 60 years since, Jock Screever, and in not much greater space of time Jock was on the back of the white pony. "Tak care ye guide him weel, sir, for he's I been short in the wind since Lord be good to me." In a low voice, "I was gone to come out white since I rode whip and spur to fetch the Chevalier to red Mr. Waverley and Vichy and Vor, and an uncanny coup I gat for my pains. Lord forge ye your honour. I might hae broken my neck, but troth it was in a venture, mayways, nor ane, but this makes amends for a Lady Waverley. 10,000 a year. Lord be good unto me." "But you forget, Mr. Macwheeble, we want the Baron's consent, the ladies." "Never fear, I be cautioned for them, I you my personal warrantus. 10,000 a year. It dings Balmawapple out and out, a year's rent's worth of Balmawapple, fee and life rent. Lord make us thankful." To turn the current of his feelings, Edward inquired if he had heard anything lately of the chieftain of Glennaquoich. "Not one word," answered Macwheeble, "but that he was still in Carlisle Castle, and was soon to be panelled for his life. I dinna wish the young gentleman ill," he said, "but I hope that they that hae got him will keep him, and no let him back to this Hieland border to plague us white blackmail in a manner of violent wrongness, and masterfew oppression and spoliation, both by himself and others of his causing, sending, and hounding out, and he couldn't attack care of the siller when he had gotten it neither, but flung it into yon idle queen's lap at Edinburgh, but light come light gain. For my part, I never wish to see a kilt in the country again, nor a redcoat, nor a gun, for that matter, unless it were to shoot a paitrick, they're a tard stick. And when they have done ye wrang, even when ye hae gotten decreet of spoilsy, oppression, and violent profits against them, what better are ye? They hae na a plack to pay ye need never extract it." With such discourse, and the intervening topics of business, the time passed until dinner, Macwheeble meanwhile promising to devise some mode of introducing Edward at the Duckrin, where Rose at present resided, without risk of danger or suspicion, which seemed no very easy task, since the laird was a very zealous friend to government. The poultry yard had been laid under requisition, and cockaleekie and Scotch collops soon reeked in the bailie's little parlour. The landlord's corkscrew was just introduced into the muzzle of a pint bottle of claret, cribbed possibly from the cellars of Tully Veolan, when the sight of the grey pony passing the window at full trot induced the baillie, but with due precaution, to place it aside for the moment. Enter Jock Screever with a packet for Mr. Stanley. It is Colonel Talbot's seal, and Edward's ringers tremble as he undoes it. 2 official papers, folded, signed, and sealed in all formality, drop out. They were hastily picked up by the baillie, who had a natural respect for everything resembling a deed, and, glancing slyly on their titles, his eyes, or rather spectacles, are greeted with protection by His Royal Highness to the person of Cosmo Common Bradwardine, Esq., of that ilk, commonly called Baron of Bradwardine, forfeited for his accession to the late rebellion. The other proves to be a protection of the same tenor in favour of Edward Waverley, Esq. Colonel Talbot's letter was in these words: "My dear Edward, I am just arrived here, and yet I have finished my business. It has cost me some trouble though, as you shall hear. I waited upon His Royal Highness immediately on my arrival, and found him in no very good humour for my purpose. 3 or 4 Scotch gentlemen were just leaving his levee. After he had expressed himself to me very courteously, 'Would you think it,' he said, 'Talbot, here have been half a dozen of the most respectable gentlemen and best friends to government north of the Forth, Major Melville of Cairnvreckan, Rubrick of Duckrin, and others, who have fairly wrung from me, by their downright importunity, a present protection and the promise of a future pardon for that stubborn old rebel whom they call Baron of Bradwardine. They allege that his high personal character, and the clemency which he showed to such of our people as fell into the rebels' hands, should weigh in his favor, especially as the loss of his estate is likely to be a severe enough punishment. Rubric has undertaken to keep him at his own house till things are settled in the country, but it's a little hard to be forced in a manner to pardon such a mortal enemy to the House of Brunswick. This was no favorable moment for opening my business. However, I said I was rejoiced to learn that His Royal Highness was in the course of granting such requests, as it emboldened me to present one of the like nature in my own name. He was very angry, but I persisted. I mentioned the uniform support of our 3 votes in the House, touched modestly on services abroad, though valuable only in His Royal Highness's having been pleased kindly to accept them, and founded pretty strongly on his own expressions of friendship and goodwill. He was embarrassed, but obstinate. I hinted the policy of detaching, on all future occasions, the heir of such a fortune as your uncle's from the machinations of the disaffected. But I made no impression. I mentioned the obligations which I lay under to Sir Everard and to you personally, and claimed, as the sole reward of my services, that he would be pleased to afford me the means of evincing my gratitude. I perceived that he still meditated a refusal, and, taking my commission from my pocket, I said, as a last resource, that, as His Royal Highness did not, under these pressing circumstances, think me worthy of a favor which he had not scrupled to grant to other gentlemen whose services I could hardly judge more important than my own, I must beg leave to deposit, with all humility, my commission in His Royal Highness's hands, and to retire from the service. He was not prepared for this. He told me to take up my commission, said some handsome things of my services, and granted my request. You are therefore once more a free man, and I have promised for you that you will be a good boy in future, and remember what you owe to the lenity of government. Thus you see my prince can be as generous as yours. I do not pretend, indeed, that he confers a favor with all the foreign graces and compliments of your chevalier errant, but he has a plain English manner, and the evident reluctance with which he grants your request indicates the sacrifice which he makes of his own inclination to your wishes. My friend, the Adjutant General, has procured me a duplicate of the Baron's protection, the original being in Major Melville's possession, which I send to you, as I know that if you can find him you will have pleasure in being the first to communicate the joyful intelligence. He will of course repair to the Duckren without loss of time, there to ride quarantine for a few weeks. As for you, I give you leave to escort him thither, and to stay a week there, as I understand a certain fair lady is in that quarter. And I have the pleasure to tell you that whatever progress you can make in her good graces will be highly agreeable to Sir Everard and Mrs. Rachel, who will never believe your views and prospects settled, and the 3 ermines passant in actual safety, until you present them with a Mrs. Edward Waverley. Now, certain love affairs of my own a good many years since interrupted some measures which were then proposed in favor of the 3 ermines passant, so I am bound in honor to make them amends. Therefore make good use of your time, for, when your week is expired, it will be necessary that you go to London to plead your pardon in the law courts. Ever, dear Waverley, yours most truly, Philip Talbot.